I'm Dr. Rashmi Halker Singh. I'm the Deputy Editor of Headache, and I'm joined today by Dr. Serena Orr, who's one of the authors of a recent publication entitled Chinook Winds and Migraine Attack Onset in Children and Adolescents, a prospective longitudinal clinical cohort study. Welcome, Dr. Orr. I'm really excited to speak with you about this really interesting topic.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited too.
So, first of all, can you explain what are Chinook winds and what inspired you to study this?
Yeah, Chinook winds are a phenomenon in the region where I live. So in Western Canada, just east of the Rocky Mountains in Calgary and surrounding areas. They're similar to a type of wind called foehn winds that happen in Europe. But it's basically a weather phenomenon when you live close to large mountains that has to do with how humid air kind of rises on top of the mountains and then falls back down in the region beside it. So basically, Cole's notes is that it's a very rapid change in weather that occurs in a short period of time, where there's a rapid rise in temperature, a rapid drop in barometric pressure, and changes in wind directions with high wind velocities. So it's kind of this precipitous change in various weather patterns that happens mostly in the colder months here in Canada, but can happen throughout the year.
Fascinating. So in Arizona, we have something called haboob, which is basically like this massive dust storm that happens in the desert. Kind of reminds me, probably nothing like that, but reminds me of that a little bit with the changing temperatures that happen so quickly and the big differences in climates that happen very rapidly and unexpectedly as well.
Yes, it is very interesting. And these winds have been known about for hundreds, thousands of years. And actually, the name Chinook translates to an indigenous, in the indigenous language, to snow eater. So often here, these are quite a welcome phenomena for people without migraine and pain because they tend to melt our snow in the winter. So.
Fascinating. So why did you decide to study this phenomenon as it relates to migraine?
So there were some seminal studies done a couple of decades ago in Calgary by my colleagues on the adult side, Werner Becker and Lara Cook, and a group of them who were the first people to look at the association between Chinook winds and migraine, but in adults specifically. And those studies found that in a subset of adults with migraine, there was a significantly higher probability of having migraine attacks on Chinook days, especially the highest wind velocity days. And they actually found an age-dependent association. So in one of their studies, they couldn't find an association in the younger adults, only in the older ones. And in their larger study, they found it across the board, but that it was much stronger above the age of 50. So we were really interested in this based on the work that they had established years ago, but also just based on hearing over and over again in clinic from patients and families that this is a thing that happens in youth as well and that hadn't been studied in that population yet. So we wanted to know if we could show a similar finding in the younger people.
Oh, that totally makes sense, especially given the recent interest in air quality and migraine, and this can add to the data. So, for someone who has not yet read your manuscript, can you tell us a little bit about the study and what you found?
Yeah, so this was a study of around 60 youth where they completed daily headache diaries at any time of year. We didn't restrict the time of year because Chinooks can technically happen throughout the year, even though they're more prevalent in the winter. And they completed anywhere from 8 to 30 diary days where they answered questions about whether they had a headache and what the attacks were like. And then we took weather data from Environment Canada from the Calgary airport, and we used a standard definition of Chinooks called Nick-Hendram's criteria. So it's specific criteria about the rise in temperature, about the wind direction, and a variety of factors that had been used in the initial adult studies. We put all that information together and we basically wanted to understand in kids, were they more likely to have a new attack if this was a day before a Chinook or a day of a Chinook? So we just made a simple definition of days where you could have one of three day types, either a regular day, pre-Chinook day, or Chinook day. And then we ran statistical models to see if there was any difference in the probability of having a migraine attack dependent on the day type.
And what did you find?
Yes, so contrary to our hypothesis and what was seen in the adults, we did not find an association between day type and the probability of an attack, even in more complex models where we controlled for age and sex, because we know those affect the probability of having an attack. And we were surprised, especially based on clinical experience, of hearing about Chinooks and migraine attacks very frequently. And honestly, in my own home with our lived experience of migraine, we believe it's a thing. And we're not sure why it was negative. So there's a couple of potential theories. So one is that we just didn't have enough data to find the association because maybe it's more diluted and smaller, not as strong as what we see in adults. And actually, we ran some power simulations to try to sort out how many kids we would need in a study that's designed the same way to see an association based on the really diluted potential effect. And we found for Chinook days, we'd need 1,700 kids. So that would be a very big study and difficult to do. And that we couldn't even, going up to a sample size of 10,000 for the pre-Chinook days, we still couldn't get enough power. So this is based on if there is an effect based on our data, it might be very, very small. So that's hypothesis number one, is that we just didn't have a big enough study. Hypothesis number two is that perhaps this is not an association that bears out in younger people. I still think there's something there, but we didn't study individual weather parameters. So we just, like I said, lumped based on day type. And there's lots of features of Chinook attacks that have been shown in other, or Chinook days, sorry, that have been shown in other studies to impact migraine attack risk. So notably the large barometric pressure drop and the large rise in temperature are features that have been pulled out of studies that look at individual parameters. So perhaps if we were to look at our data in a different way, where we studied weather specific individual parameters versus the day type, we would see something. But it's possible that the adult studies did show that it was mostly the older adults who were sensitive to this particular weather change. And so it's possible that this is something that's unique about an older migraine brain. And I have some hypotheses about that based on, drops in barometric pressure and how we think the brain senses that and the aging vestibular system. But we can talk about that if you're interested. So unknown, I think it requires further study, but it's very interesting and makes us scratch our heads and think about what to do next.
Absolutely. I think there's so much to be learned, even from negative studies, and maybe especially from negative studies, because we know from our patients that there is something to be said about air quality, barometric pressure, weather, as it relates to migraine. We hear this over and over again, including from our younger patients who don't know about the conversations surrounding migraine, and they speak to this. So there
Mhm.
is definitely something there. And I think that your study definitely adds to the conversation. You just outlined so many different possibilities about what these next steps might be.
Thank you.
Do you have any final comments about that you want to share?
No, I think I really hope more researchers become interested in the Weather Migraine Association. It's shocking how poorly it's been studied, considering how important a topic it is to patients and families. So I'm hoping to do more work in this space and to inspire others to as well, because I think it's a big topic of public interest and something that may help us better understand migraine disease and how to treat it.
Well, thank you so much. This was a great conversation, and I look forward to more work from you.
Thank you.